What have you brought us? What have we got? The beast phase.
The beast phase.
What are the beasts?
These beasts are, so they're all a breed called Riggit Galloways, which are a relatively not particularly well-known breed.
No.
Rare breed, very rare breed, an archaic strain of the Galloway breed. So relation to the Belties, but just a different type of cattle.
I know I'm not supposed to say they're cute.
So we put the collars on them all yesterday, Kelly. They've been much better with them on than I ever imagined they would
really?
be. Yeah, they've seemed very settled with them.
Oh, good.
And so now we just have to release the beasts.
Release the beasts. What's going to happen? Are they going to?
How high is that wall?
They're off.
Yeah. There's 8 in total. They will never have seen grass like this ever before.
So, how old are they?
So these are, they'll be between 15 and 12 months old, something like that.
Okay.
And what you'll probably find is, and they've already done it, and we actually brought them separately, but they've separated them. There's 2 fours really, and they've been brought up in different groups of animals.
Oh, and they've stayed together.
And they will tend to hang separately, certainly for a little while, and then they'll, as time goes on, they'll all just get used to each other and merge with each other.
So have they been with you at Malham, or have they been?
Yeah, no, they've been at Malham, just in different groups at Malham. Yeah.
It's saying hello, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Oh. So the big thing that we're doing is, well, it's all about boosting biodiversity. That's our kind of main aim with everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
And so we're moving from these like high numbers of sheep nibbling everything away to these sort of lower numbers of cattle, in the hope that that's going to help that biodiversity.
Yeah.
Your experience of farming in this way for many years, how does it help?
In our context, it ensures that the grass doesn't dominate the whole sward. So you have cattle at low numbers, and they'll come in and the hoof prints, and they'll graze some areas lower than other areas, and what you're effectively creating then is a complete mosaic of a sward and a mosaic of habitat. So you're getting a completely different habitat to what you create when it is totally grazed by sheep. So you'll get long bits, you'll get short bits, you'll get hoof prints, you'll get and these are all just little pockets, micro habitats almost, of where things can develop, where botanical species can get going, etc. So it'll change the landscape completely.
Also in this area we've got breeding wader birds, so we've got curlew, lapwing, snipe, oystercatcher. Do cows pull the vegetation with their tongue, which is why you get all of this different structure, is that?
Yeah, they do graze slightly differently. The sheep will nibble away with the teeth, and like you say, the cow will wrap the tongue around it. So it's a bit less selective, whereas a sheep will specifically target certain species, particularly botanical species, whereas it will just create a much better structure for the lapwings and the curlew and the wading birds that you're talking about.
Because we've removed sheep sort of a year ago, and we've kind of let the grasses grow a bit, and we did have some Dexters here at one point. We have actually had successful chicks for the first time this year, which was really nice to see.
I mean, there's all sorts that they bring. Obviously, they dung onto the floor. That can bring food. That brings invertebrates, as long as there's no insecticides in the dung. That brings invertebrates, and then that's food for chicks themselves and food for birds. So it's, you sort of get certain levels, and then it all builds on. The nature just builds from level to level, depending as a result of what's already there.
The first animals to come were the pigs, and already they're making such a difference in that area. And then now just to have the kind of cattle here, adding, it's just
no. It's and it's exciting from our perspective to be involved and to see it develop. I mean, you're working from a really low base here. This is perennial ryegrass and a clover mix probably. It will have been fed with nitrogen. This is a different, like we're saying, our cattle will never have seen grasses like this before in their lives.
They're enjoying it.
They'll love it, and it's great for cows, and they won't stop eating all day, and then they'll be belching and farting for the rest of the night. But it's a different structure to what we have at home, and and actually getting this reversed into something which is brilliant for nature will certainly be a challenge, but it'll be an exciting challenge.
So obviously the cows are here, we're training them here, we've got, we're trying to kind of get this species-rich grassland back, but we've also got these areas that are kind of on the rewilding side where we've planted trees, and eventually the kind of cows will be roaming through there and like in the scrub area, and hopefully keeping that mosaic as you were talking about. Is that how you see it is going to work?
I think it's suck it and see it at this moment in time,
Yeah.
Kelly. I mean, hopefully if we get these cattle trained so that they're really good on the no fence stuff, which is exciting in itself, and just seeing that develop will be interesting. But if we get them really well trained, then we can use those as the kind of conservation grazing tools that anywhere on the rewilding site that you think needs a bit more of a breaking up and a bit of a graze, just to sort of knock some of those grasses back. I think it's becoming more and more apparent that having grazing animals in a system like the one that you're trying to develop at Broughton, their role is becoming more and more important. It's a different role to obviously the farming role, but they play a significant and important role to maximising biodiversity in nature, even in a rewilding kind of scenario.
So they're going to be outside all year round?
Yeah, it should be. These have only had one winter so far, and they've never spent a night under a roof yet. But we have animals on our farm which are 10 years old and they've never been under a roof. We just don't put animals under roofs.
And what's the advantage to that? It's seen as like this really good thing that they're out all year round. What does that mean? Why is that so good?
There's two advantages to us, and this is why these hardy cattle of Belties and Riggits are really important to us. We really feel that sort of grazing in the late winter, so February, March, is really critical to the botanical species in particular. So to get the best out of it from a nature perspective, that graze is really important, and the animals have to be hardy enough to be able to stay out at that time of winter, and they cope with it absolutely no problem. But then from a farming and a business perspective, it's cost saving. So if you stick them in a farm building, then they're entirely reliant on me as a human to feed them and get the feed to them and make the feed and then get the shit away from them. And they're entirely reliant on fossil fuels when they're under a roof, and then all that creates cost and is an additional cost to us that we don't need, and we don't really feel we can have that within our business. So it's just a complete cost saving. So it literally goes from being actually quite costly to minimal cost to actually get them through the winter.
Because I think when we came up to you as well last year or whenever it was, there was a vet there.
Yeah.
It was Claire, and she was telling me about the dung beetles.
Yeah.
And she was saying something like, if the cows go in over winter, it stops that cycle from the dung beetle being able, and dung beetles do great things, and she was kind of saying that's another importance as to why to have them out, so then these dung beetles aren't all dying off when they're going in.
That comes back to the invertebrate side of things, doesn't it? And the not wintering is really important, like saying, but also we don't use any medication on any of the animals either. There's some medication around porons in particular, which are particularly harmful to dung beetles. So the insecticide gets into the dung and then it's onto the floor, and then the dung beetles go into that and it kills them as well. So if you're using those kind of products, then you're also interfering with the dung beetle life cycle as well. So there's various different bits to it, but that dung beetle is just a really good sign of the health of the invertebrate health of the farm as well. So and it's those that feed the birds and feed the mammals and feed everything else, and that's when you get this layering up of nature. But to have those dung beetles and those other inverts in the dung pat is critically important to that. I think from our perspective with the cattle on the farm, I think what they've become is it's become really important to us that they just become part of the nature on the farm, and the nature and the animals, the sort of domesticated animals, for want of a better word, they all just become part of the same thing, and actually providing habitats for nature, which is what we're trying to create, and providing the right place for the animals to live is exactly the same thing. So the nature becomes part of the animals, and the animals just become part of the nature, and that's all completely interconnected. And so it's effectively all the principles of the animals living out all year round, not having any insecticides, etc., which is just exactly the same thing that none of the nature on the farm will have either. They will create their own habitats. They'll be able to live and feed themselves and drink on the farm without our help, and that's almost where we're trying to get to with the cattle as well. And for that to happen, there has to be a completely interconnectedness between the nature and the domesticated animals on the farm. And if you take the cattle out of the system, then the system itself starts to break down, doesn't it? Because as soon as you take the cattle out of the system, you don't get the breaking up of the grasses, you don't get the botanical species, you don't get the inverts necessarily in the dung, and then so things start to break down generally. And that's I think why we're starting to understand that some kind of grazing action within with any of these kind of systems that we're trying to create is so critically important.
I mean, I guess we've evolved over millions of years with large herbivores. So you know what the herbivores that we would have once had, we don't have, but these are kind of filling that role. And you know, I think what you're talking about is kind of putting them back in the kind of natural system. And then they're kind of contributing, aren't they, to things that we need. And
but it's putting them back in at a level where they aren't impacting upon the rest of the animals on the farm, as in the nature, and there are numbers where they can completely and utterly sustain themselves without necessarily a greater deal of involvement from us. Obviously, we check them and we ensure that their welfare is entirely looked after, but other than that, we want them to just exist and live and survive and thrive on the hill without necessarily a great deal of interruption or interaction from us.
And are you not needing to put that intervention in because of these hardy breeds, like as part of the problem? You know, why are they able to do that and other breeds aren't?
Hardiness is one of the things, but then other characteristics are really important as well. You know, they're brilliant mothers, and so they will look after their young. The time that you need to look after yourself around these cattle is when they have young, if we get to that point, because they are so protective of the young. So that in itself is a characteristic which is critically important. Their ability just to give birth without our assistance, which they do really easily. In fact, they almost give birth like a deer would do, where they would leave the herd, they will have a calf somewhere, and the cow will come back and rejoin the herd, but she'll keep going back to the calf to feed it, basically.
Oh, really?
So that in itself almost is like a wild animal kind of attribute. It's a lot of the characteristics that we've almost sort of not bred out them, but we've sort of managed out them because they haven't been important to us. When an animal's in a farm building, it doesn't have to look after its animal, it doesn't have to feed its animal, it doesn't have its young, it's by itself, because there's always human intervention to ensure that happens. But what we're trying to do is get away from that and allow the cow and the animals to completely exhibit their natural behaviour. And when we allow them to do that, we start to understand just how bloody good they are at doing that, and it's only our intervention that's kind of prevented that. For these cattle, for example, they've never ever had any medication whatsoever, so no vaccines, no routine vaccines, no wormers, no treatments whatsoever. They're just cattle in as natural a state as they possibly could be. We never say to people, eat our meat because it's better meat, because that's completely subjective. But what we can say to them is, this meat is completely free of antibiotics, it's free of any kind of vaccines, so we believe that it is healthier for humans to eat our meat than it is some of the other stuff that's produced, which is receiving quite a lot of those on a fairly regular and routine basis. What we believe is that the more we've put nature at the forefront of the decision-making process, the better off we've been from a business and better off we've been financially. And the main reason for that is that as soon as you start putting nature as the decision-making process, it usually means, you can use antibiotics as an example. If you say we're not going to use antibiotics because we don't think it's great for the environment, then the added benefit to that is that you're cost saving. So in some ways we are probably producing less volume of meat than we possibly were. We aren't actually, but we kind of assume that we probably would do because we're going down that route. So you're selling less, so how do you make money? Well, actually, in fact, your costs of production have been so decimated that actually your margin is greater than it was previously. And if we go right back to when we were producing hundreds and thousands of lambs every year, the cost of production was so great that we were making tiny margins, if we were making any margin whatsoever, and we were entirely propped up by subsidy. Whereas now it's actually the farming business that's making money, and the subsidy is almost just a bit of an added bonus, and it's that way around now. But it's because we've put nature at the forefront of the decision-making process, but that's resulted in reduced costs.
And that surely feels like more sustainable as well, you know, when you're not
relying
on...
It's sustainable in every way, whether it's financially sustainable. We're far more resilient to other stuff going. Weather, for example, last winter, far more resilient to that. It didn't really affect us that greatly. In terms of environmental sustainability, we think we're in a completely different place to what we were previously, and I'm working less hours on the farm. So from a human and a social sustainability, it's different as well. So, you know, and all three are obviously critically important, and all three are critically important to the fact that we're potentially going to be still there in 10, 20 years' time.